Hello class, this is video lesson number 16, Thursday, May 14th. Last lesson you learned about how the United States acquired California and the New Mexico territory from Mexico. You learned about the Mexican War. You learned how President Polk instigated a war with Mexico, instigate meaning started. And we beat Mexico in a 2-year war, and we ended up taking half their country. That becomes 7 states of the United States. So that is another big example of manifest destiny. Again, manifest destiny means, well, it's the idea that the United States should extend its borders from the Atlantic to Pacific Ocean. This was just another step in the manifest destiny era, a time period where the United States was just simply growing in size. And after we win land from Mexico through the Mexican War, many Americans start filling that land up. And that's what this next section is about. We're going to talk about 2 areas in particular in those lands. One is California itself, and the other one was an area called Utah. Eventually it would be named the Utah Territory. That was part of the New Mexico Territory. So I know it's confusing. I keep throwing territories out there, but as time passed, borders would change, territories would change, and eventually these territories do become states, and that's how we know them today. But let's start with California. In 1849, which was a year after the Mexican War ended, gold was discovered in California. Gold was discovered in a place called Sutter's Creek. Sutter's Creek was an area, well, it was an actual creek, which was near San Francisco. The guy who discovered the gold, his last name was Sutter, tried to keep it a secret. But of course the secret got out, and before he knew it, thousands of people were rushing to that creek trying to find gold. And in the year 1849, over 80,000 people rushed to California, mostly to find gold. So many people came in the year 1849 that people who came that year were nicknamed 49ers. If you've ever wondered why the San Francisco 49ers NFL football team is called the 49ers, it's for this very reason. It's also a reason why their colors, one of their colors, is gold, the other being red. A common color that was used by the gold seekers. Many of them wore red neckerchiefs, or today we'd call them bandanas, around their necks, and they would put them over their mouths and nose, sort of like how people wear masks for coronavirus today, to protect themselves against the dusty air. There are times in California where it's very dry, and the wind will kick up dust. So that's where the red comes from. But if you've ever wondered, that's how you get the name 49ers. Anyway, getting back to the gold rush, 80% of the people that went to California to look for gold were Americans. But we need to keep in mind there were also a lot of immigrants from other countries. When news of gold spread across the world, other people outside of the United States wanted a piece of the action also. And of the largest immigrant group, we had the Chinese. More Chinese people came in this time than had ever come up to that point before. And today there's quite a large Chinese American community in California. It got its start in 1849. Because California grew so rapidly, you had the rise of what's called boom towns. It's called a boom town because it seemed as if the town just magically appeared overnight. Sort of like an explosion goes boom. They exploded in growth so rapidly they were called boom towns. Most of the people who settled in boom towns were looking for gold, and the reality is that most people looking for gold never found it. Merchants made huge profits, though. As time passed, more and more people realized you can make money off of people, selling them things. An example of a merchant who did very well for himself was a Jewish immigrant named Levi Strauss. Levi Strauss sold these sturdy work pants to the miners, and later on he would sell them to cowboys and ranchers. And if you haven't put it together already, this is where we get Levi jeans today. So the first denim jeans, Levi jeans, which are the original jeans, come out of this time period. Because California grew so rapidly and there were so many boom towns, California and much of the West was oftentimes nicknamed the Wild West by people who lived out east. It's called the Wild West because there were no police and no prisons at first, and at times some towns were literally lawless. Because of this, people took the law into their own hands. People who formed groups to protect their towns and enforce the law were called vigilantes. Sometimes vigilantes were good. Other times vigilantes were like criminals themselves and did not follow their own laws. But eventually the Wild West settled down. The Wild West went away. It got calmer. Police departments were established. Prisons were built. And laws were enforced. And after a while, it looked like any town or city out in the East. In 1850, California became a state. The people of California did not want slavery, even though half of their state was below the slavery line, 36-degree 30 line proposed by Henry Clay during the Missouri Compromise. So, for the first time in American history, a compromise from before is challenged, and they make an exception for California. It's made into a free state. This is going to make the South very, very angry. We're going to come back to this in a later chapter. Some people say that this was a cause of the Civil War that people just didn't realize at the time. But California did become a state, and it became a free state, and a very large one, if that. Now, the second thing we'll talk about, or I'm going to mention, is the settlement of the Utah Territory. Utah would be settled for very different reasons. California, people flocked to because of gold. The people who originally settled Utah, though, were seeking religious freedom. The religious group we're talking about are called the Mormons. The Mormons are actually, their official name are the Church of Latter-day Saints. They were founded by Joseph Smith in Western New York, and they lived for a little while in Western New York to themselves. But they were persecuted, and they ran into a lot of discrimination and had a lot of trouble with other groups, other Christian groups. And you're probably saying, well, why would Christians not like other Christians? The reason was that the Church of Latter-day Saints, or who we call today the Mormons, they had their own Bible. And many Christians thought this was wrong and that they should be using the Bible that other Christians used. The Mormons also had certain practices and beliefs that other Christians looked down on or thought were against Christianity. The biggest one being polygamy. Polygamy is the practice of having more than one wife. All other Christian religions believed this was anti-Christian to do this, but the Mormons did not. So because of this, the Mormons were persecuted. They had a hard time living anywhere next to other Christians, and as a result, they moved around a lot. Eventually, they moved further and further west, and while they were in Illinois, Joseph Smith was brutally killed by an angry mob. A man named Brigham Young takes over, and he decides to move the Mormons to the Utah Territory, which is virtually uninhabited. Utah has a harsh terrain. It's very difficult to farm. But the reason why Brigham Young decided to move his people there was because he figured no one would bother them, and no one would be anywhere near us to bother us. So the Mormons packed up their belongings, and they left Illinois, and they made it to Utah. When they got to Utah, they found the going tough. The Mormons, though, worked very, very hard to irrigate the dry land, and eventually they created decent farmland. They created a small city called Deseret, which many years later would grow to be a very large city that today is called Salt Lake City. And they built their settlements near the Great Salt Lake, a gigantic lake, but it's not freshwater, it's salt. Utah would eventually become a state in 1896. So to sum up the lesson, the West, or I should say the lands that we get from Mexico, they're settled for very different reasons. One grows rapidly because of the lure of gold, and the other grows very slowly because of the promise of religious freedom. Slowly, other lands acquired from Mexico in the New Mexico Territory would grow and would later become states, which would be after the Civil War. States such as Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona. So there you have it. That's the last section of Chapter 12. You'll have a few questions to do for next week. And there's a very short video clip on the California Gold Rush that I encourage you to watch. It's literally only 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So have a good weekend. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.